Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be talking about the newest expansion coming to Cards, Covert Operations. So this expansion is dropping June 11th, and this is going to, today we're going to be looking at the first batch of cards they have revealed. So they've revealed about 3 cards for every main nation and a couple of the minor nation cards to give you an idea of what the archetypes are going to look like, what the new mechanics are on the front page, and then since I'm recording this about 12 hours after the original announcement, closer to 24 hours, they also revealed 2 new cards since then, so we're also going to be looking at those. They're going to be revealing cards daily, several cards daily until the expansion releases, so, you know, join the Cards Discord if you want to see them up to date, or you can subscribe here, and I will be covering them maybe about once a week or so, whenever there's about 15 to 20 new cards or so to look at. So, just a quick rundown. There's 87 new cards, 2 new keywords, several additional thrilling themes to redefine the battlefield, 96 cards leaving to the reserve pool, and 24 cards coming back. We've already looked at the cards leaving and coming back in my somewhat excessively long review of the rotation video, which released yesterday as of the day of recording this, so, you know, check my channel and watch that if you haven't already. We will get into the new mechanics and the new cards, my thoughts on them, and what we can start to see as shaping up to be the potential big decks of the expansion, and early predictions on what the meta is going to look like post-expansion, and we will get into all of that after the intro.
What a performance there by J-King.
J-King, full plot armor.
J-King is pushing himself into the ranks of the legend.
J-King is our world champion! J-King 7! What? The back-to-back Cards world champion!
Alright, so the first keyword that we have to get into is Covert. So Covert is units with Covert are deployed face down onto the battlefield and cannot be affected by orders, countermeasures, or unit abilities. They operate for 1 credit and are revealed on attack or being attacked. So basically, what you see when your opponent plays a Covert unit is you just see the card back. You just see a flipped over card, as if you were at a physical board and they literally just turn the card upside down and played it, so you have no idea what it is. But you know it's going to be within the limited pool of cards with Covert. So that is how well this mechanic works is going to depend drastically on how many different Covert options there are and how distinct they are from each other. And yeah, they can't be interacted with whatsoever by orders, countermeasures, or unit abilities. This is where I'm a little worried, just because Cards has always had a very, very strong presence of high unit intensity decks, or high order intensity decks, or just all order decks. Much more so than other card games, I think. Definitely more so than other card games at this cycle of the development. That's always just been an intrinsic part of Cards, and Covert is a very, very, very powerful tool against those types of decks. Now, I'm not saying that those types of decks should not have responses to it. I'm not saying that's the way that every deck in Cards should work, or every meta should be defined by the power of their largely order-based decks or anything like that. It's just this is an incredibly powerful tool against that, because these units literally cannot be interacted with until they attack or you attack them. And if you're playing a deck with low to no units, it's going to be very, very difficult to reveal a Covert unit without your opponent wanting to reveal the Covert unit, and your opponent's probably only going to want to reveal the Covert unit when it's going to blow you off the board. So yeah, I'm a little worried about how strong this is going to be. We'll have to see how many Covert options there are, how viable a deck with a lot of these Covert options are just shoved into a single deck. How good is that going to be? And as well as how strong each individual Covert card is going to be. Like, if you can stick a Covert unit for like 5-6 plus turns, is that just going to win you the game? Because there's a lot of decks in the past and a lot of decks right now that are not going to be able to reveal a Covert unit for probably the entire game. Like, they would not be able to reveal it proactively, because even if you run a couple guards or a couple defensive units, your opponent would then need to push it to the front line, and then you would need to attack into it to reveal it. So I'm a little worried about Covert. Then we get to the other keyword, develop, which is choose one of 3 cards randomly chosen from the specified pool and add it to your hand. So this is, if you're familiar with Hearthstone, which is where I come from in terms of previous card game experience, this is literally just the discover mechanic. Like, it is just one for one the discover mechanic. It even has a similar word. I will 100% be accidentally calling this mechanic discover. Hopefully not, like, on a cast or something, but it's the discover mechanic. But what does this mean for cards? Because discover in Hearthstone, it's fun, it's flashy, it's basically printed on every single card these days. But I was playing Hearthstone back before Discover was in the game, and I remember the expansion when Discover came out. It was a relatively small expansion, and there was only a few things that discovered, and they discovered from pretty limited pools. And then they just started printing Discover on basically every single card. The pools got bigger, and it basically just led to the death of value in Hearthstone, because you could just discover cards that discover cards that discover cards that, you know, randomly give you things your opponent cannot possibly play around, and it will generate infinite value. And that eventually led to me losing interest in me losing interest in Hearthstone, and, you know, in my opinion, the game dying in terms of just becoming a massive RNG, like, clown fiesta. So I am very worried about this mechanic being in cards just because of its history in Hearthstone. But that did not have to do with the mechanic itself. That had to do entirely with the Hearthstone dev team deciding to print that on every single card in every single expansion moving forward. So hopefully 1939 does not do that. Like, yes, a mechanic like develop is fun and it's interesting and it's really easy to print, but that doesn't mean you should do it. I'm not saying that we shouldn't ever have develop again in any future expansion ever. I'm just saying, you know, keep a cap on it, because things can get out of hand really, really quickly. And we'll have to look, because we already have similar things to develop. Like, this is literally just exactly what the 2-credit choose one of 3 random elites from your nation cards. That I don't know if they're going to, but that could be changed to 2 credits develop an elite from your nation or that nation. Because that is exactly what it is. So yeah, we'll have to see, but let's get into the cards now. Starting off with Britain. So, the first British card that we're seeing, and these are the ones that were revealed in the initial announcement, and I'm assuming that these were hand-picked to show off the themes of each nation, like sort of the archetype that is being pushed for each nation. Now, we'll have to see, you know, if that's true, like if the additional cards that are revealed later support that. But I would assume that based on some context clues that is what they're going to be doing. So the first British card we're going to be looking at is Commando Raid. And this is going to get very confusing, because there was Night Raid, there is Night Raid that summons a commando, and then there was just the card Raid, and, you know, there's a bunch of commandos, but Commando Raid is a 3-credit order, pin a unit, add a number 10 commando to your support line. And the number 10 commando is the 2/1 smokescreen that pings whenever you play an order. So this just fits straight into commando decks, and it gives commando decks access to 3 additional commandos, which is really, really big, because the issue that commandos always had is you have 5 commandos, period, and it's most decent control decks are capable of removing 5 commandos over the course of the game, and if they remove all 5 of your commandos, how do you win the game? And traditionally that has been, like, they would run like a Commonwealth package with honeys and whatnot, but that strategy fell by the wayside because you'd rather run Commonwealth with better, more consistent archetypes. But now that Commonwealth's gone, and cards like Monsoon Run and Supply Shortage, which sort of, again, made commandos a little redundant, are gone, it's going to open up the design space a little more for commandos, and we'll have to see if the meta will adapt to it. But this suggests to me that commandos is going to be the main archetype for Britain that is being pushed in this expansion. And again, now 8 commandos, very, very powerful. I think this card is probably slightly worse than just number 10 Commando on its own, but you absolutely, if you could run 6 number 10 Commandos in Commandos, you probably would. And this has added synergy of, if you have Pioneer Company on board, this is 2 credits, so it's literally just Commandos plus a free pin. And it will trigger off of Crusader, so it will also trigger Commandos that you have on board already. So it's not anything flashy. Like, it's a very straightforward card, but it's very powerful. The limited rarity is going to be interesting because it's going to give better access to this card for lower rarities. So it's going to be actually much easier to build Commandos at lower rarities, because yes, you have Pioneer and Elite, Crusader, Special, but you don't need those. If the core of the deck is, 3 Commandos that are limiteds, 3 Commando Raids that are limiteds, and like 4 Cup of Teas, 4 Convoys, and those are both standards, you're starting to get a pretty good Commando deck going for yourself there. But yeah, not a lot else to say about this. Then we have Baker Street Irregulars, which is the first develop card we see. It's a 1 credit British order. Develop a British Special Force unit. If you control a commando, also develop a British order. So actually, a quick thing to note about develop that I forgot to mention previously is within the develop pool, the develop pool will include non-collectible tokens. So, for example, later down on this list, we will see a card that says develop a US bomber. That can develop into B-24D and B-24J, the 2 options off of production order. Now, those are not cards in your collection. And previously, any card that says, for example, the destruction, add a random Soviet infantry to your hand, that was only collectible Soviet infantries. Now, these things include non-collectible options, which is very interesting design choice. We're going to have to see how often this comes up. So when you have develop an elite, or develop a card from your deck, which we'll see later, or develop a bomber, which we'll see later, those all make sense. This is develop a British Special Force unit. This does not make sense, because Special Force unit is not a tag in the game, it's not a tribe, it's not anything. What is a British Special Force unit? Well, this is a semi-arbitrarily decided group of cards, and by semi-arbitrarily, I mean, like, it's decided based on the history of the cards, like the names associated with the cards that are considered Special Force units. But my point is more like that grouping of cards is arbitrary because they don't necessarily all work together. Like, bombers all function like bombers, and elites are all very clearly, this is an elite. It has the elite rarity. Whereas Special Force units, cards like this, you'll have to figure out over time. I almost said discover, pun not intended. You'll have to figure out over time what this pool of cards is, because at a low level, it might not matter. At a low level, you might be like, you'll play this card and see what happens, or your opponent plays this card and you'll see what happens, and you don't really care. It's fun and it's interesting, you're excited, you're seeing weird wacky cards, it leads to weird wacky game situations. However, if you play this game competitively, if you try to play this game to win, and you try to play this game to win tournaments, cards like these are going to be a nightmare, because you're going to have to figure out what the pool of possible options are, and then you're going to have to play around all of those possible options every time you see cards like these played. And that is really frustrating. So what is a British Special Force unit? They said in the Discord shortly after revealing this, that in this case, a British Special Force unit will include all of the commandos, and it will include all of the parachute units. So, 1st Airborne, 5th Parachute, number 10 commando, number 1 commando, number 63 commando, the big one, the 6 cost 5, or the 6 cost 3/3. So all of these guys can be developed off of Baker Street Irregulars. Now, how good is that? There's a lot of parachute regiments, like, you're presumably playing this in a commando deck, because it's a 1 cost British order, and if you have a commando on board, it also does other stuff. So it's very clearly a commando card. The issue is, how often do you hit a commando? Because there is one, like, number 10 commando, and that's the one you want. And maybe you would take the 6 cost one sometimes, and all of the other British Special Forces units are kind of bad. Like, there's situational where, like, for example, Piracy, Piracy could be quite good. It doesn't work the way with commanders that you would want it to, but you can always pick Piracy to just trade out, like, a huge threat. Or you could pick First Airborne because that is smokescreen, and you'll just keep it there, and maybe eventually it gets big and scary and can trade out some things. But I feel like the develop a British Special Force unit is typically really bad. So we have to then look at the other thing, develop a British Order. This is insane. So remember how I said the thing that, one of the things that ruined Discover in Hearthstone was the increasing size of the pools of cards. Well, a bomber is a relatively small pool of cards, an elite is a relatively small pool of cards, a British Special Force unit is a relatively small pool of cards. A British Order is a massive pool of cards. Like, imagine this being played in a tournament, and you have your opponent's deck list. You know there's no Monsoon Rods. You know there's no Commonwealth. I'm assuming this can't pull cards that are not in standard rotation. I certainly hope so. But, like, you know, you look at your opponent's list. It doesn't have Carpet Bombing. But on turn 2, they played Baker Street Irregulars to develop a random British Order. And, like, random as in they get 3 random options and they pick the one of those 3 that they best want. Like, there is a degree of player agency. It's not literally just a random card. But, you know, it is the best of 3 random cards. You now have to be, in the back of your mind, a little worried that your opponent's just going to whip out a Carpet Bomb at any point for the rest of the game. But they also might whip out a naval support. Like, maybe they push a Blackwatch to the front line, and you're like, well, I know they don't run any attack buff cards in their deck, but maybe Baker Street Irregulars developed into a naval support, and now they make the Blackwatch a 6/6 and kill me. I'm very skeptical of this keyword. The question is Baker Street Irregulars playable in Commandos? Because it's a lot of value generation. It's kind of similar to a Convoy, because it's a 1-credit order, so it will trigger all commando pings. It's also a 1-credit British Order to draw off of Crusader, and then it adds 2 cards to your hand. So it's an order to activate all of your order synergy stuff, and then it will give you 2 cards if you have a commando. And I mean, you're only playing this card if you have a commando. Now, one of those cards is going to be really bad, and the other one of those cards is going to be incredibly situational. Like, sometimes you are just going to have to pick an absolutely garbage British Order. Sometimes this card will single-handedly win you a game. Now, no matter what British Order it is, even if it's a low synergy British Order that doesn't really do much, it's going to trigger all of your commandos, and it will going to trigger your Crusader because it's a British Order, guaranteed. So I feel like this is probably good enough to run. I know it's kind of weird to say that this might not be good enough to run because it's like a special and one of the first cards they revealing for this, obviously, the Commando synergy deck they're pushing. I just feel like Commandos already has a lot of good options, and we'll have to see how consistent the develop is. And, like, I'm sure somebody could, if they figured out the pool, they could very easily do the math on how often you get a number 10 commando from this. But yeah, like, this card does not fill me with a lot of joy. But it's a very interesting card. If you don't care about this game competitively and you want to see flashy, wild stuff, this card is going to create a lot of highlights, I feel like. Then we move on to the third British card revealed so far, HMS Talbot. It is a 1-cost British countermeasure. If your HQ is about to receive lethal damage, give it +6 defense first. So this is a very interesting card. And what's interesting about this card is, like, if you just look at it as 1 credit, gain 6 defense, that's insane. Obviously, that's a broken card. However, it's not an order, so you can't do it on demand. It does not have any synergy with any order cost cards or order trigger cards. It's a countermeasure. And it exclusively works if your opponent would bring you to 0. So it gives you 6 health if your opponent kills you for 1 credit. And, you know, 6 health when your opponent would kill you could be the difference between winning or losing a game. You know, like if your opponent's trying to do exactly lethal damage, and you have HMS Talbot up so you don't die, and then you OTK them on the following turn, or you clear the board and start healing up more on the following turn. This card is going to be very, very scary on ladder, because you're not going to know if your opponent's playing it. And even if this card is not, like, competitively popular, you're still going to see it sometimes on ladder, and you're going to be like, oh, I have, like, this sick line for exact lethal, and then you go all face, you play around ultra, you hit them for the last bit of damage, and then HMS Talbot heals, and they don't die, and you lose. So it creates a lot of interesting game situations. The issue is, at 2 credits, this card would suck, because you're going to have to hold this up a lot, because a lot of decks have burst. Like, you know, if you're in a situation where you're dead on board and you don't surrender and you hold up a credit, your opponent's going to be like, oh, you have HMS Talbot, and, like, you know, trade out some units and go face. Now, there's a card in Hearthstone called Ice Block, which was when you're, when your hero, which is the equivalent of your HQ, would take lethal damage this turn, stop it, and you can't take damage for the rest of your turn. So it's very similar to a countermeasure, and it's literally just like you can't die. You play it, and then when you would die, you can no longer die that turn. That is not the case for HMS Talbot. It's just +6 defense, which is a lot of defense, but, you know, if your opponent just has massive, overwhelming board control, it's not difficult to set up 6 over lethal. So if your opponent thinks you have HMS Talbot, they could just focus on trading out. They don't need to trigger the countermeasure immediately. They could just, you know, if they have lethal damage on board but think you have HMS, they could not kill you, deal some damage to you, trade out the board. Next turn you have to hold up HMS Talbot again, so you're wasting another credit. And also they might just then have more than 6 over lethal on board. So it's a very interesting card. I don't think it's that good. Despite saying that, I think there's still a decent chance this card sees play. Just because, especially against things like Jagro, this card could just be really, really good, because there's so many situations against Jagro where, like, you know, they have a signal regiment you can't get rid of, and it's just slowly chipping away at you. It will depend greatly on what the meta is looking like. Like, if there's a lot of Blitzkrieg decks, this card is probably going to be bad, because against Blitzkrieg, it's like, oh, I have to permanently be afraid of dying from hand. Like, I have to permanently be afraid of taking, like, 20 plus damage from hand. It's also interesting that this does play around Great Patriotic War, so, like, if push OTK, Soviet push OTK is really popular, maybe HMS Talbot could be a bit of a counter to that, because they play push, and then they deal the 12 damage from hand, and then HMS Talbot stops it. It really gives you 18 health. So that's kind of interesting. I'm glad this card exists. I'm a little worried for the, or I'm a little sad for the free-to-play players who are, like, gonna get 1 elite immediately, and, like, this is gonna be their 1 elite that they open from, like, their 10 packs they buy or whatever. Just because it's a little sad if this is, like, one of your only elites and you're free-to-play. But then let's move on to Germany. And the first German card we have is Sturmbrigade Rhodos, which is a 7-cost 7/7 infantry. If this is in your hand, this unit costs 2 less each time your countermeasure triggers. So this is very similar to Wellington. This is very similar to 34th Guards, the self-damage 6/6 infantry. And this seems like it's going to be the core backbone of a countermeasure deck. So we've previously seen countermeasure synergy cards, like the Blumenvoss, which is whenever you trigger a countermeasure, draw a card. Problem is that's an elite, and, you know, your opponent can just trade it out before the countermeasures trigger. So that one was quite difficult to use. There is the Fizzlers that would trigger the countermeasures in your hand, but that just is essentially credit cheating for countermeasures. This is the first, like, truly good countermeasure synergy card. I suppose there's the 2/2 that gets +2/+2 on board every time a countermeasure triggers. Sometimes you could, like, pop off with that, and, like, you probably would play that in this countermeasure deck if you make a dedicated German countermeasure deck, because then you have, you know, that's also a standard, so now you have 8 threats of just big statted cards that grow. Well, this one doesn't grow if you have a countermeasure trigger, but, you know, you can cheat it out quicker. The question is, what will the countermeasure deck be doing? Like, is this good enough to work? And I think the reality is no. I think countermeasure decks will never be tier 1 because there's too much anti-countermeasure synergy cards in the game for it to ever be tier 1. Like, if people, started to get bothered by countermeasure decks, it would be so easy to just, tack your deck marginally around it and then just crush them, 90% of the time. It's also the type of thing where it has a lot of surprise value because you're not sure what countermeasures your opponent is actually playing if you just queue into a random person on ladder playing a countermeasure deck. But, in a tournament where you have open deck lists, it's like, oh, I know they don't have evasive action, or I know they only run one secret operatives, and that triggered, so now I know there can't be any countermeasures that stop my removal orders, so I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to lead myself down the wrong route in navigating through the maze of countermeasures. So that's always the issue with countermeasures, is you typically only have the credits to prevent your opponent from doing one thing, and if your opponent just happens to luckily choose the other thing you're not countering, you get blown out because you just spent your turn doing nothing. So for example, if you hold up a Careless Talker from the deep because you think your opponent is going to play a unit, and then they instead play an order to remove your card, you just wasted your turn doing nothing, and now your unit's gone. On the flip side, if you hold up a you hold up an evasive action to stop a deployment effect and a secret operatives to stop an order targeting your unit, and your opponent just plays a blitz card and trades out your guy, you just wasted your turn doing nothing. So countermeasures are very, very difficult to make into an actually good deck, and I think that's fine because I don't think anybody wants countermeasures to be tier 1. Just think about how deeply unfun that would be. It's good that countermeasures looks like it will be a solid deck that you can build yourself, build your own, put in the countermeasures that you vibe with the most, take it to ladder, and maybe get a 60% win rate, largely based on surprise factor. And that's fun. That is good to have countermeasures be a playable deck that is largely for fun. And yeah, I think that's good. This card looks really, really strong. What I love about this card is it is difficult to snowball with. Because, unlike self-damage, you have, 3 34th guards in your opening hand, and then you do, Sickle, and then Sickle draws Red Dawn, and then you play Red Dawn, you play Sickle on 1, and then you do, Red Dawn, and you top, a second Red Dawn on turn 2, and then back when it costs 6, you could play all 3 of them on turn 2. That does not work with countermeasures. You cannot trigger countermeasures on demand. Also, very few of the countermeasures draw cards. So, if your opening hand is 3 Sturm Brigades, and then you do, turn 1, hold up Careless Talk, and then your opponent doesn't play a unit. And then you do turn 2, hold up Careless Talk, and your opponent plays War Machine. And then you do turn 3, hold up From the Deep, and your opponent plays, War Bonds or whatever. And now suddenly your opponent has 7 credits, and your hand is full of 7/7s that cost 7. So yeah, this card looks fun. Not particularly great. Then we have a German countermeasure. So again, this is why I feel like this is showing the main themes that are going to be pushed. And based on past expansions, these aren't going to be the only themes. Usually there's a couple different things, but usually there's one theme that each nation gets pushed in. So for Britain, it's Commandos, and for Germany, and looking like it is countermeasures. Foiled Plans is a very, very interesting one. So Foiled Plans is a 1-credit German standard countermeasure. When the enemy gives an order, deal damage to the enemy HQ equal to its cost. So this is just another burn countermeasure. This is just better Lightning Strike, in my opinion. Lightning Strike being the 1-credit countermeasure when your opponent draws an extra card on their turn, deal 4 damage to them. And what's really good about Foiled Plans is it's really easy to trigger. It is another countermeasure that's very easy to trigger for Sturm Brigade or other countermeasure synergy cards. It's 1 credit. If your opponent plays an order, trigger this countermeasure. Now, it's not a particularly good countermeasure. The effect is rarely going to be that good. Sometimes it's going to win you the game out of nowhere. But again, it's one of those cards where if it's good enough to see consistent play, people just immediately play around it, and then the card sucks. That's unfortunately how most countermeasures work. But what's important about it is that if you're just trying to get countermeasures to trigger, if there's enough overwhelming countermeasure synergy that you just want them to trigger regardless of how effective it is, This is one is really, really good, because if you just hold up a Careless Talk and you hold up a Foiled Plans, that's 2 credits. If your opponent plays a unit or order, you will trigger a countermeasure. Now, you might not be countering their countermeasure, you might not be killing their unit, but that's 2 credits and you're guaranteed a trigger if they do anything. And, even if Foiled Plans, like, your opponent plays around and they play the cheapest card in their hand, still, like, 2 damage here or there is pretty decent, and sometimes you'll catch like a 5, a 6, or a 7. Like, sometimes your opponent will have to play their like carpet bombing or whatever, even if they know you might have a Foiled Plans, and then suddenly you hit them for 7 and you're back in the game. Like, the chip damage from this is not insignificant, and again, it's really going to depend how many countermeasure synergy cards. My main worry with this deck is the card draw, because they don't have Lurking Danger anymore, which was the 1 credit draw 2 countermeasures, and Blommenvoss is far too inconsistent as an elite. So, yeah, you need countermeasures, and you also need the countermeasure synergy cards, and then you also need the card draw to have any amount of staying power in the game. I don't think it will all come together, but again, this is looking like a really fun deck. And this is a standard, the last one was a standard, so if you're free to play, consider picking up some of these cards and trying it out on ladder with whatever countermeasures are currently in your collection. Then we have the third German card that we're going to be looking at, the 96th Infantry Regiment, which is a 2 credit 4/4 Blitz Infantry. When you deploy another unit, destroy this unit. So 2 credits for a 4/4 Blitz Infantry is obviously very, very good with 1 operation cost. Now, the card text on this, when you deploy another unit, destroy this unit, is really, really, really bad. However, I want to say a couple things about this card, because I think a lot of people are misevaluating this card. I think a lot of people are thinking about this card in the wrong way. Now, at first glance, you look at this card, and you're like, this is an aggro card. Obviously. That, or it's a countermeasure card. This card is very multifaceted for how simple the design is. But the first thought is it's an aggro card. It's 2 credits, it's 4/4 Blitz, you just blitz out like a really big guy and start beating away at your opponent's HQ. And then they think, well, I play that in an aggro deck, I play this guy, my opponent doesn't kill it, and then I can't play any other units. And then suddenly this card kind of sucks. And they're like, yeah, it's too inconsistent, not good enough, yada, yada, yada. Alternatively, you could play this in a countermeasure deck. That was the most straightforward. You just play this, and then you don't really play a lot of other units. You're just holding up countermeasures. And then, you try to trade this off and then start slamming down the Stone Brigades. However, you can also play this in control as just a 2 credit 4/4, trade something out. Like, we've seen 989 be really, really powerful in control. And that's a 3 credit 5/5. This is conditional. This is a 2 credit 4/4. Now, the 5 and 4 can be a very important damage break, depending on what cards we're seeing in the meta. However, the difference between 4 credits to play and 3 credits to play is also quite big. So both have their upsides and downsides. But I also want to make paint another situation for you with this card in like an aggro deck or a mid-range deck. You're not playing it on turn 2. You're not playing it on turn 3. This card sucks when you play it like that. What you do is you're playing this on like turn 7 or turn 8 along with a bunch of other stuff. Like, you play this with the last 3 credits of like your turn 7 or your turn 8 to push it to the front line. Like, you would play in all your normal stuff, your Panzer Grenadiers, your autocannons, your Akshubs, yada yada yada. You're just blowing your opponent off the board. And then at one point you have 3 credits left, you have some frontline control, your opponent's at like 15 health, and you just use 3 credits to push a 96 infantry regiment to the front line, because it's really difficult to remove. And then one of 2 things happen. Either your opponent like just spams down some guards, they remove one of your units, they play a big threat, whatever they do, and then you just play Blitzkrieg and win the game. So you don't have to play any more units after this. Or they play down enough guards or enough, like they play down enough of guard units, or they remove enough of your other units that you don't have lethal anymore, and then you immediately trade out into their support line for 4 damage, and then continue to play your game plan. And in that case, you just did 4 credits to deal 4 damage to the support line, which, like, when you paint it like that, it doesn't sound great. That sounds like a worse tactical strike, but, that's often how a lot of units work. And otherwise, like, maybe your opponent had to spend removal on this, in which case, like, if your opponent hammers this, you go credit equal. And if this sticks, then you just play Blitzkrieg and win. Like, this card is really, really good because you can use it at the end of your turn and then interact with it at the start of your turn before playing additional units. Like, it's a ordering matters a lot type of card. It's just going to be very difficult to find the exact moment. Like, what I like about this is you sort of need to big brain this card. In terms of, like, knowing when you can play it, that you are guaranteed to either win or be able to trade it with something on the following turn. Because, for example, like, if you play this card, you take the front line, and then your opponent, like, pins your entire board, you now can't play units without destroying this for free and at a massive tempo and value loss. But if you could just pass, that's another massive tempo loss. So yeah, a very interesting card. I'm quite a big fan of this card. I think it's very interesting. I'm not, like, saying that it's 100% going to see play. I find it difficult to imagine that you're not willing to play this card in a lot of, like, even just control decks. Again, 2 credits to trade out. Like, a big problem with Tactical Strike is not being able to deal 4 damage to the front line. But, you know, if you're running Schützens and Panzer Grenadiers and the meta's a little slower, maybe this is just worse than other German Blitz to the front line options. But we'll have to see. Then we have Soviets. And the first Soviet card that we're going to be looking at is Covert Operation, also the name of the expansion. It's a 4-credit order. Add the top covert unit of your deck to your support line. So this mirrors like Machines of War, which is add the top Soviet infantry from your deck to your support line. So, you know, it's on brand for the Soviets. And all covert units are 3 cost. So this is basically 1 credit, draw a covert unit, and then play it. Now, this is always worse than 1 credit, draw a covert unit, because covert units can't be affected by countermeasures. So there's, like, basically no situations where playing draw a covert unit for 1 credit is better than this, or sorry, is worse than this. I guess if your opponent is holding Lightning Strike, because Covert Operation technically doesn't draw the card. But, like, yeah, outside of ludicrously niche situations, this is just worse than 1 credit, draw a covert card. And, like, would 1 credit, draw a covert card be playable? It really depends on the number of covert cards you can fit into a deck. Like, if you could fit reasonably, like, 8 covert cards into a deck, 1 credit, draw covert would probably see play. Now, this is worse than 1 credit, draw covert. So I feel like, short of covert being a main synergy for your deck, I feel like this card's not good. And even if covert is the main synergy of your deck, I still feel like you probably just have better options. Like, even if you don't have better card draw options, I feel like you would just rather not... Like, I feel like you would just rather run... like, you know, like a Soviet elite that doesn't have covert, it doesn't synergize with your covert cards. But I feel like you'd just rather run your covert cards, run your removal, and then run your strong elites, than run this somewhat expensive tutor effect for covert. But again, we'll have to see what all of the covert cards look like, what all the covert synergy cards look like, but I am very skeptical of this card. Oh, are these out of order? Or did I miss one? It's weird. Well, we have our first covert card, Grumman Goose. It's a US covert card. It's a special. So 3 credits, 1 operation cost, like all covert cards are going to be. And this is a 2/3 fighter. Reveal, when a friendly unit damages the HQ this turn, draw a card. So you can play this, and not only is it in the support line, which is difficult for some decks to deal with, it's in the support line and cannot be affected by anything, short of unit attacks, which makes it incredibly difficult to deal with. So it's almost certainly going to, like, unless you are losing, this is going to be, stick around for a turn. And then when it reveals, friendly units damages the HQ this turn, draw a card. If you reveal and attack the enemy HQ with this card, for 1 credit, you draw a card. Which, like, is good. And then, you know, if you have, like, 2 other units in the front line that can attack HQ, it reveals and draws 3 cards, and that's really good. The issue is, if you're playing like a frontline deck, which I imagine is the type of deck you want to be playing this in, it's card draw is not typically your issue. Like, you have Sherman, one of the best card draw cards in the entire game. Your issue is trading, like, getting value trades and keeping board. And hitting the enemy in the HQ with a bunch of different cards is antithetical to value trading and keeping a good board. So it, like, in frontline, the only time you attack the HQ is if you have lethal, basically. So this just feels like it doesn't fit into frontline. The wording of this is very interesting. We've seen a lot of cards and cards say when a friendly unit attacks, or like when combat occurs, this says damages, which opens up the door to a couple things. For example, I don't know, like, you could play this in like commandos, and then when your commandos ping and hit the enemy HQ, that draws a card. That could turn into a very powerful draw engine on an empty board, because, for example, you have 2 commandos and a Groomin' Goose. Every time you play in order, you draw 2 cards. Because you play the order, it triggers commando twice, they each hit the HQ, Groomin' Goose then draws them. Twice. Or you could play this in a Japan-US deck. You have Signal Regiment on board. Every time a friendly unit dies after Groomin' Goose is revealed, draw a card. So, you know, you play this on a board of 0-up Jago units, and you start trading down the guard, and then you hit face after the guard dies, and you draw like 4 or 5 cards. Now, these are all very high, like, Groomin' Goose is difficult to remove, but it's difficult to imagine playing a deck with Groomin' Goose, where you have 3 credits to play Groomin' Goose, and then also have the board necessary to really get the max potential out of Groomin' Goose. And you could theoretically, like, play this and then wait until you have the good board to use it. Like, you don't have to reveal it immediately. It's just difficult to imagine how well that works. But maybe, like, there's so much possibility with this card. Like, again, like, autocannon. You play Groomin' Goose, you play autocannon, you reveal it, Groomin' Goose, and then you start spamming down 1-cost guys. Like, there's a lot of ways to make a Groomin' Goose draw a lot of cards immediately. And, like, if you can consistently draw, like, 4 cards off Groomin' Goose, this is so much better than, like, Enigma or Take Liberty. The issue is just how often can you do that? What decks can you do that in? The other thing to say about Groomin' Goose that I'm blanking on who said it, but somebody has already figured out a 3-card OTK with Groomin' Goose that you can't pull off reasonably because it requires cards from 3 different nations. But if you have Groomin' Goose, which when this reveal when a friendly unit damages the enemy HQ this turn, draw a card. And then you play Honey from Britain, which is when you draw a card, gain 1 HQ. And then you play Commando Kiefer, which is when you gain HQ, deal 1 damage to a random enemy. Now, if you have an empty board, Groomin' Goose draws, which makes Honey heal 1, which makes Commando deal 1 to the enemy HQ, which makes Groomin' Goose draw. And you just draw through your entire deck and deal, like, however many cards are in your deck in damage to your opponent. I want to see that be pulled off. Like, obviously it has to be in a casual game because there's no reasonable way you could set that up. Actually, although it makes me wonder if Baker Street Boys, did Baker Street Boys say a British? Yeah, it says British Special Forces. I was wondering if it just said Special Force Unit, like if you could get the Commando Kiefer, but no, you definitely can't. But that's just a hypothetical, really funny OTK. This one's an interesting one because it feels like it's not going to have synergy with other Covert cards. Like, this just feels like a card that you run in a deck like that does other stuff. And I don't know if that, like, if all the Covert cards are going to be like that, if Covert is just going to be a keyword that is printed on good cards that work on their own, because this Soviet card certainly suggests that Covert is going to be a very specific archetype. Or maybe there's just very specifically super strong Covert cards in Soviets that you want guaranteed that it's worth tutoring for. But that seems doubtful. So then we get to the next. I must have missed a Soviet card. I'll probably add that in after we talk about Bomber Mafia, which is another US card. So Bomber Mafia, we have our second develop card now. And Bomber Mafia is 2 credits, develop a US bomber. Now, that is just not a good effect. It's also very similar to Ingenuity from the Winter War, which was 2 credits, discover a British or US bomber, I think. Maybe there's a cost cap on that. But the difference is this is developed, that one wasn't. So this one can get the non-collectible bombers. So you can get B-24D, you can get B-24J. And the big upside of this is if you have 6 or more unspent credits. So if you have 8 or more credits, and it doesn't need to be credit slots, like you can Reichsbank into this or something, deal 2 damage to all enemies. So basically, it's like the Desperate Measures effect, 2 damage to all enemies if you have 6 or more unspent credits when you play this card. So you want to play this card at the top of the round, while you have at least 8 credits. And if you do, that's a very powerful effect. The US doesn't really have board clears. Like, they have a couple support line clears that are situational and hard to use, and also strap bombing. This is a very powerful effect, and it makes ramping a lot in US main ramp much more tenable. Because previously, you basically needed to run Britain Ally and then try to ramp into carpet bombing. And you can still do that, but then you can also run Bomber Mafia, which makes it, slightly easier to do. And it also has just an added upside. Like, there's situations where maybe you need to play this and not care about the 2 damage to all enemies. Like, maybe it's like a control matchup, they don't really have units on board, and you draw a bunch of cards and you find Bomber Mafia and there's a specific bomber you're looking for to play immediately on the next turn. And you just, like, I like that there's situations where maybe you just play this without the effect. Or you can, like, plan your turn around it. You can plan your ramping around it. You can plan your credit gain around it and try to trigger the effect. I think this is a really interesting mechanic, and it's a really good way to push US main ramp. I much prefer this to what they did in Winter War. Winter War, they released just a bunch of really powerful ramp cards. Like, they just made production order, and were like, if you ramp a lot, you win the game, because have massive bombers. And that's a very boring way to do ramp. This is a very exciting way to do ramp. And we'll look at the last US revealed card, which is America at War, which shows that this is sort of the American archetype, is this if you have unspent credits. So, America at War is 3 credits, gain an empty credit slot. So, it's like War Machine, it's like Milk Truck. Now, if you have 2 or more unspent credits, draw a card. And that is massive. So, the War Machine, like, compare this to War Machine. War Machine comes out on 2, and that is huge. Now, compare this to Milk Truck. Milk Truck comes out at the same time, but Milk Truck heals you for 2, and it has a body. So if you're playing this on turn 2 or turn 3, this is just miles worse than War Machine. But think about those games where, it's like turn 20, and you play War Machine, and then nothing happens. Like, you play War Machine, and you go from, like, 14 credits to 15 credits. Congratulations. You now have 1 less card in your hand. You wasted a draw on that card. And, US main does not have a lot of card draw options. Now, what if you run, like, 3 War Machines and 3 America at Wars? You still try to hard mulligan for the War Machine on 2. But later in the game, you'll have a bunch of America at Wars, which, for 1 extra credit to play, you'll now draw a card later in the game. And this doesn't even have to be much later in the game. So, for example, you could play, like, Milk Truck on turn 3, or America at War on turn 3, whatever. And then on turn 4, you have 5 credits. You could start with America at War to ramp to 7 credits on the following turn, and then you'll have 2 credits left over to, like, play a honey or attack with a unit or do whatever. Like, you can get this out really quickly. And I'm not saying that this is going to see play. It's going to have to be tested. My immediate expectations is that this is going to be a little too weak, and you'll just rather play War Machine for the consistency, because 2 into 4 is so much better than 3 into 5, because there's basically nothing to do on turn 2 in US other than play War Machine. So skipping the turn 2, you just lose the game a lot of the time if you miss the turn 2, especially because at least Milk Truck, if you ran Milk Trucks over War Machines, or you ran both and missed the War Machine, Milk Truck at least was a body you could trade out on the following turns. It healed you a little bit, so it, like, kept you alive slightly longer. America at War does none of those things, so the meta would have to be quite slow for this card to be good, I think, but it's fun to have diversity. It's the type of card that you're not just going to throw in on top of all of the other ramp package, because then that's just too much ramp. But it's good to have diversity in just, like, thinking about how you want to build your ramp. I think that's quite interesting. And now I will go find that missing Soviet card. Alright, so I pulled it up, and this is So this is the one other card that was announced in the initial announcement for Soviet cards. Oddly enough, Soviets only had 2 cards announced, whereas every other main nation had 3. The 2 new cards that were announced today are both Soviets, so Soviets caught up very quickly. But it, again, just seems bizarre to me. Like, why are Soviets not getting back elites in the rotation? Why are Soviets not getting the same number of cards revealed immediately? What is this Soviet hate that's coming out this expansion? But we get a look at the first covert card. So, you know, you play Covert Operations, and you can try to pull a 38th Guard Rifles. 3 cost, 1 operation, of course, for a 3/4 infantry. So this is pretty decent body. You have the 4 health, which is important. But I suppose it's evaluating units is quite different with Covert, because you don't have to worry about having them be removed immediately by orders. It's exclusively by unit combat, and specifically exclusively by unit combat that can immediately attack something in the support line. Now, so 3 for 4, 3 for a 3/4, pretty good. The effect is add a T-34 1942, which is the heavy armor 1 when this is targeted by orders, draw a card. T-34, not the Blitz T-34. So it adds a T-34 1942 to your support line if this unit was covert for 3 or more turns. So this is also our first taste of more covert synergy card. Like, this seems like the type of card that you build a covert deck around rather than just throw into, like, a frontline deck, for example, like Roman Goose. So how good is this effect? This is what I meant previously at the top of the video when I was talking about how I was a little skeptical of covert, because there's certain decks where this is just really bad. Like, you know, like if your opponent's like playing, for example, Britain Air, and you play 38th Guards, and they attack this with like a Swordfish, and they reveal it immediately, and now you have a 3/3 infantry in your support line that does nothing. Congratulations. Or you like against Jagro, and they leave this up for, like, if they know it's a 38th Guards, they leave it up for 2 turns and then attack it with like a 2/2. Or they just go all face because they know the T-34 you get doesn't have Blitz. Or maybe like they go all face and force you to reveal it on your turn to not get the tank, because if you don't trade out units, you're gonna die. And then you're gonna play this against decks like, you know, like Ramp, where they play ramp into ramp into ramp into, like, you know, orders to wipe the board that can't target covert units. And then, like, this card is just guaranteed tank. So you just play this on 3, you play a second one on turn 4, and then you're just guaranteed 2 tanks in a row. And because, like, if this is, like, I feel like this is just matchups where you're guaranteed to get a tank, and then matchups where you're guaranteed to never get a tank. I feel like there's very few matchups where you are, like, sometimes going to get a tank, if that makes sense. I suppose it depends what the other covert cards are. But I want to say that this covert card is a covert card where your opponent always wants to reveal this as quickly as possible. Like, obviously there's situations where you're Jaguar and you just go all face. But if, you know, you intend for the game to go on for more than 3 turns, you always want to reveal this covert card as quickly as possible. Which makes me think that there's going to be Soviet covert cards that you do not want to reveal on your turn. Like, I'm assuming that there's going to be covert cards where it's like, if this was revealed on your enemy turn, do X. And if there isn't that, like, if covert cards are all just, like, sort of, if it's been covert for X amount of time, or, you know, when revealed, draw a card, or something like that. If covert cards are all just, like, doesn't matter which turn it's revealed on, or whose turn it's revealed on, then this card just seems really bad, because it feels like you just treat all covert cards the same. And then if there is cards that get massive benefits if it is revealed on the opponent's turn, that just seems really bad to me, because it's basically just, like, coin flipping for winning or losing the game. So, like, for example, if there's, like, a covert card, I don't know. There's a covert card where it's like, if it's revealed on your opponent's turn, gain +5/+5. Obviously, that's a massive exaggeration. That would be insane. But let's just say, like, hypothetically, there's a card that gains a massive benefit if it's revealed on your opponent's turn, that is going to immediately win the game. Or at least do a massive tempo swing very early on in the game. And then there's this. That's going to suck, because your opponent's going to see you play a covert card, And then it's like, do I have to trade this out and lose the game immediately? Or do I not trade this out and lose the game immediately? And obviously, like, there's over time, like, if you can't trade it out immediately and then your opponent chooses to, like, but again, like, if you get a benefit for revealing it on your opponent's, like, for your opponent revealing it, and then you get a benefit for it not being revealed, both situations will involve you not revealing it. So you can't even, like, try to figure out what it is through that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just very skeptical. I hope it's not a good strategy. Like, I hope that we do not get into a world where, like, a covert deck is a popular and strong choice, because I think that would be terrible metagame. Like, I think that would just not be fun. I think people would have fun for, like, the first 5 minutes and then just start complaining about it. Because, you know, it can't be targeted by orders, it completely shuts down certain archetypes altogether, and you just flip coins to see if you hit the lose immediately when attacked, or lose immediately when you don't attack covert cards. Yeah. On the other hand, Covert seems incredibly slow, especially if you are trying to not trade them out, in which case decks like Jaggro should just be able to roll them over. But that would also not be fun if Covert beats everything but Jaggro, and then Jaggro beats Covert, and then we just have a Covert Jaggro meta. Because, you know, Rock, Paper, Scissors metas are also not fun, which is what we've had in Winter War for too long. So then we get onto the Japan cards that were revealed immediately, like right off the bat with the announcement. And this is where I am going to have the most fun, because this archetype seems so much fun. So it seems Japan's archetype for this expansion is self-credit denial, which is really, really fun. So 5th Regiment is a 4-cost, 0 operation Japanese infantry standard, 4/4 no blitz, which on its own, all of that sucks. It's like a 5th Ranger without blitz. But it's text. When you lose a credit slot, this unit gets +2/+2 if it's on the battlefield, or -2 cost if in hand. So this starts to make a lot of sense. So, you know, if you are denying yourself credits early, this has 0 op. So if it's on the board, it operates for free and continues to grow. And if it's in your hand, it goes down to you being able to play it for free, which makes up for the fact that, you know, you are losing credit slots. Now, in the game currently, there is only 2 ways to lose credit slots. One is Desperate Measures, which was actually rotated, but it's coming back, which makes sense because, you know, it's Desperate Measures and they're doing self-credit denial theme. And the other one is... I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's the 2 credit, your air units operate for free, Dawn Operations. Lose a credit slot. Now, we haven't seen any, well, that's not true. We've seen 1 air unit for the credit denial synergy. I don't know if they're going to run that, because this seems like it's going to be the bread and butter of a credit denial, self-credit denial deck. You're probably going to run all the 1-cost, 0-op blitz guides, like expansions probably for card draw, and you're going to run some 5th regiments. You're probably not running Dawn Operations, but this guy seems really, really good, and it seems like it's the type of card where, you know, if you cheat out a lot of them early, it's scary, but it's not like an instant win. Like, it's not like, you know, 34th Guards, because we're like 6/6 is like just going to snowball you off the board, whereas 4/4, not quite the same. Now, obviously, it can grow into a 6/6. But the other thing is, with self-damage and slamming huge stats early, self-damage was doing that by lowering their health total, which was very difficult to take advantage of. Like, there's very few decks that can take advantage of your opponent dealing 10 damage to themselves if they have a bunch of 6/6s on the board. Whereas, losing credit slots, if you are able to answer, like, the first couple 5th regiments and whatnot, your opponent's now, like, in a massively losing position, because 5th Regiment only triggers if it's in your hand. So, you know, like, if it's turn 7 and you have 3 credit slots and your opponent wipes the board and you top deck a 5th Regiment, you can't even play it. Like, it's just over. There's no coming back with this deck, or with this archetype, I should say. So it's interesting. And what I love about self-credit denial is it's gonna be galaxy brain to play. Like, I feel like this might be the hardest deck in Cards to play if this is like a very solid deck, because knowing when to deny yourself credits is incredibly important. Like, I've saw, back when Desperate Measures was the only credit denial thing and there was no synergy for it, just like people ran it in Jaggro, I saw so many games where people just lost the game on turn 2 because they decided to play Desperate Measures to clear like 2 units, and they just drastically misevaluated how terrible losing a credit slot on turn 2 is. Now, if all of the cards in your deck are incredibly cheap and designed around you having low credits, and also you have payoff cards for lowering your credit slots, now suddenly lowering credit slots on turn 2 might not be bad, but it might still be bad in specific matchups or with specific hands. So it's going to be incredibly important on knowing what matchups are like and knowing when to deny credits, when you have enough payoff in hand to start lowering credits, or maybe you just change your game plan around entirely and just play a much slower game, try to get a big hand, get up to like 8 credits, and then lower like 4 credits in a single turn to just do a massive pop-off turn. Like, do you do that, or do you consistently lower credits as you go? Like, you get up to 3, and then you stay on 3 credits for like 6 turns, losing 1 credit slot every turn, but for sort of like slowly rolling payoffs as you go. We'll have to see what the payoffs are, we'll have to see what the credit denial options are. But that's going to be really interesting, and what I'm really excited about is playing around outs with this, because you might be like, oh, I'll, play, we'll get to the next card, actually, Air, Land, and Sea. This is the first credit denial, self-credit denial card, like, card that actually denies you credits on top of Desperate Measures, that we've seen. I imagine there's going to be more than just this. But this is a 1 credit, develop a card in your deck, lose a credit slot. So this is like Spoils of War. It's similar to Spoils of War, which is the 2 credit German order. 2 credits, look at 3 cards in your deck, choose 1 to draw, put the other 2 on the bottom. Now, this does not put the other 2 on the bottom, which is important in situations, but it's 1 credit, look at 3 cards in your deck. Like, it randomly shows you 3 cards in your deck, you develop 1 of them. Another very important difference between Air, Land, and Sea and Spoils of War is Spoils of War draws it, Air, Land, and Sea develops it, and develop always creates a copy. So this is, you can use this to get extra copies of your elites. You can use this to get extra copies of your payoff cards. So, you're probably not going to run out of cards in a self-credit denial deck. Like, the game's probably going to end far before that. But it does mean, like, this is a limited. If you play 3 Air, Land, and Seas, you could potentially develop into an elite twice. You could potentially develop into an elite once and then draw it naturally later on. Like, it opens up the possibilities of, again, this is sort of a problem with develop where it just creates massive question marks as to what your opponent is supposed to play around, which is annoying in a competitive sense. But this is a really cool card overall because, you can play Air, Land, and Sea. Like, if you're in a losing situation where you're looking for, like, a couple key cards left to win the game, do you play Air, Land, and Sea to develop a card from your deck, see a massive array of options. Like, you see 3 options, you can plan your turn around that, and then you get your natural draw in the following turn. Or maybe you can use it immediately to, like, try to negate the overwhelming board position you're in. Or maybe playing Air, Land, and Sea is going to lose a credit slot that is necessary for certain outs on the following turn. So imagine you're on 7 credits, and you don't have Shiden in hand, and your opponent's on 4 health. Yes, you can play Air, Land, and Sea, and potentially find a Shiden, but if you do that, you're not going to have the credits to play an attack with Shiden on the following turn. Because you're going to stay on 7 credits. Now, on the other hand, you could wait and just try to draw Shiden naturally. But if you do that, you have 3 less draws to find Shiden, or any other out, and if you miss that, then yes, you have 8 credits, but now you lose. So it's going to be super interesting to balance all of these thoughts in winning positions and losing positions. I'm so excited for this deck. Like, I am not a fan of Covert. I'm skeptical of, I'm not a fan of Covert being its own synergy, and I'm skeptical of Develop as a whole in, like, an entire mechanic. I am so excited for self-credit denial. I am more excited for this deck than I have been excited for any other, like, announced deck in the history of Cards, and I'm not joking. I'm not, like, playing this up to sell packs. I don't have any deal with 1939. I am genuinely really excited for this. And I've been really excited for other things in the past. And things I've been excited for and things that I thought were going to be good completely did not work out. Most notably Destruction Jagro with... I'm blanking on the name of it, but the Destruction Jagro, thought that was going to be really good. That has seen literally zero play. It's still really fun, but it's just a little too slow. I'm not saying that this is going to be good. I don't think we have seen the payoffs yet to just run this over regular Jagro. Like, I feel like you would just rather play regular Jagro, and that's been a big struggle in trying to push other Jagro archetypes. Because, it's difficult to push other Jagro archetypes because you always have to ask the question, like, is it better than just playing regular Jagro with, just the regular Jagro package, and then if you print any good enough cheap cards in Japan, they'll just also run that in the regular Jagro package. So that's another thing to consider is, can you run any of these cards outside of a self-credit denial deck, which is presumably going to be an incredibly aggressive deck? This one, absolutely not. You can't run 5th Regiment outside of, like, a dedicated self-credit denial deck. And an aggressive one at that. Air, Land, and Sea, you could run this in Control. You could absolutely run this in Control. And now you're not going to be playing it on, like, turns 1 to 5, ever, unless you're, like, in a ludicrously losing position. But losing a credit slot later in the game, not that bad. Like, on turn 9, like, what's the difference of, like, because losing a credit slot, you lose 1 credit for however many turns it takes you to hit 12. So, if you're on turn 9 and you deny yourself a credit slot, you're only losing out on 3 credits over the course of the game in exchange for this massive tempo swing of developing a card in your deck, which in Control can be quite good, especially because Japan has at times lacked card draw, or it just has very specific answers that you can't always have all in your hand. So Develop could just be a really good card in Japan Control that you run 1 or 2 copies of. The fact that it creates a duplicate is also could be used very niche. They are rotated reorganize. But I did have the thought in my mind of, like, you could reorganize Last Rites into your deck, like, bottom 3, and then, like, Air, Land, and Sea to get guaranteed Last Rite hits. Now, they rotated reorganize and they rotated Last Rites, but in Classic mode, you could conceivably generate 3 additional copies of Last Rites relatively easily with Air, Land, and Sea, for... just hilarity. But yeah, this card I'm very excited for. I think this is developed done right, because it is still limiting the cards to the pool of cards your opponent is running. Now, you don't know if they're going to get which cards they're going to have more copies of. That is something that, like, you can track, like, you can hand track to see what they developed into. So what cards you're going to have to play around, but that's quite difficult. Something that I hope Cards does, especially now that they're bringing in Develop, that Hearthstone does, is in Hearthstone, it will say where the card came from if it did not come from the deck, underneath the card when it's played. Like, if you hover over it in the card history, it will say, like, discovered by or created by X card. Like, if they played Air, Land, and Sea to discover something, like, you play Air, Land, and Sea, discover Sheedan, when they play that Sheedan, it will say created by Air, Land, and Sea. And, it just makes it easier to keep track of. From a competitive sense, I understand why it's like, yeah, it's hard. Like, you have to pay attention to have a competitive advantage. But on the other hand, if you're going to add a bunch of develop stuff, it'll just save everybody a lot of headaches if you do that. Now, let's look at the 3rd credit denial card. It is the E13A Jake, a 3-cost, 2-operation, 2/3 bomber. When you lose a credit slot, your units get +1/+1. It doesn't say your other units, so this presumably also gets +1/+1. This seems like a mediocre payoff. I'm not gonna lie. Like, are you gonna run this in a credit denial deck? Absolutely. It has synergy with credit denial, and, sometimes it will win you games. Like, sometimes you play this on turn 3, your opponent can't remove it immediately because it's a 2/3 bomber, and then you start losing credits and this becomes a 3/4 bomber, then a 4/5 bomber. This is an issue for several different reasons. One, you need at least 4 credits to play this and trigger it on the same turn, which means you either have to wait till turn 4 and develop, like, have a board and then keep that board, or you're not going to be able to do this. Like, it also means you can't be denying yourself credits earlier than that. or else it'll take even more turns to get to the Jake. Or if you just play it on 3 credits, your opponent might just remove it immediately. And also, you're, like, rarely going to have time to attack with this because it's 2 operation cost in a deck that is losing yourself credits. So, like, yes, you might get, like, a 3-4 bomber or a 4-5 bomber, but it also might take your entire turn to operate this card. So, a lot of the times, you might consider this card saying can't attack, because, you know, you're going to be playing units to buff and then cards to lose yourself credits. And you're not going to have 2 credits left over to attack with this guy. Credits are going to be very, very tight in this deck. So, like, you know, are you going to play this guy? Probably. Is it that good? I don't think so. Like, Desperate Measures is astronomically a better elite for this deck. And then you have the Jake. And I think that's fine. Like, a deck like Credit Denial, the games are going to try to end very quickly. And an issue with Jagro right now is if Jagro hits its elites, it wins its games. Like, I'm sure, like, if you look at the win rate of Jagro that hits, like, of the pool of Jagro elites right now, like, Raiding Brigade, Aichi, Sendai Regiment, or not Aichi, Audacity, Dragon Slayer, I know Dragon Slayer's not an elite, but it's a one-of card in your deck, and, like, Shiden. So let's just take those 5 cards. Raiding Brigade, Signal Regiment, Audacity, Dragon Slayer, Shiden. I'm sure that if you look at the games where Jagro draws 2 of those 5 cards by, like, in the first 10 turns, they probably win, like, 70% of the time. The games where Jagro draws 0 of those 5 cards in the first 10 turns, they probably win, like, 40% of those games. And the games where Jagro draws 5 of those 5 cards in the first 10 turns, they probably win, like, 95% of the time. So having these massive swing elites is not great for aggro decks, because it just sort of comes down to if you draw all of your massive swing elites in a 40 card deck with limited card draw, you're gonna win. So, you know, having an elite that is good but not great is actually really good. Because I think, honestly, 5th Regiment is probably just a better individual card than E13 Jake. Like, if you were building a Credit Denial deck and you had 1 card slot left over and you only had 3 5th Regiments and you didn't have Jake and you could only put 1 of them in the deck, you would pick 5th Regiment. And I think that is healthy for the game. Not every elite needs to be insane. On the other hand, I hope, like, these are the only 3 cards they've revealed. The deck needs more than this. This can't be, like, another Repair situation where you, like, show 3 good Repair cards and then Repair gets nothing else and the deck sucks. So, like, what we have seen, this is amazing, this is amazing, this is good enough to play. It needs more than this. I hope there's, like, at least, like, probably at least 1 more Credit Denial payoff that needs to be really good, and 1 more, it needs 2 more payoffs and at least, like, 4 more cards you could put in the deck to deny yourself credits. Like, that could be, like, a standard, or it could be, like, 2 specials, or, like, a limited and an elite, or whatever. But, yeah, I think it needs, like, at least 3 additional cards to support the archetype split between payoffs and ways to deny yourself credits. For this deck to be, like, good, but I am so excited for this. It is difficult to understand. You should be excited for this, too. Because even if this is amazing, like, if this is a tier 1 deck, the gameplay on this is going to be insane. This is just going to be Galaxy Brain plays. I am so excited to see this deck on ladder. I'm so excited to see this deck in tournaments. Yes, I think this deck probably has the potential to just, like, absolutely roll somebody over by, like, turn 4 with 0 chance of them doing anything. Like, it's going to just have insane, ludicrous pop-offs, probably. But, you know, if the game doesn't end on turn 4, there's going to be so much opportunity for both players to play around with this. Then we get on to the ally cards. They revealed 1 card for France and 1 card for Poland. The French card is nothing too flashy. This honestly could have been a card added to the game 4 years ago, but that's not to say it's a bad thing. It's the 51st Regiment, the 51 Premier? I don't know. It's been a while since I took French. Regiment. It is a 3-cost 2/3 infantry. Deployment, choose 1, gain +3 attack and blitz, or gain +3 defense and guard. So a 3-cost 2/6 guard is just a good card. Like, that's literally just Surrey Regiment. There's a British 3-cost 2/6 card. It was played for a long time. And a 3-cost 5/3 Blitz with 1 operation cost is a card you would play in a lot of control decks. Like, you know, it's similar to the 989, which is a 3-cost 5/5 Blitz, but it's conditional. So this is a non-conditional 3-cost 5/3 Blitz. That's pretty good. So the fact that you have both of them in one card, this is just a really solid control card. Like, it's not flashy, it's not insane, it's just a really good card that, like, if you have extra French slots open in a French ally control deck, you're going to consider this card. And you'd even consider this in certain mid-range decks, because mid-range can get use out of guard, just to keep your more valuable targets alive. Obviously, if you're playing against a much faster deck, to guard up your HQ. And then you also have the flexibility of being a 5/3 Blitz to deal with a big unit pushed up by another mid-range deck or a control deck, or just to push into the front line to pressure down your enemy. So, like, I'm just very happy this card exists. We've seen France get a lot of really, really mediocre cards where it's like, maybe this is card 40 in a main nation. It's absolutely not card 12 in an ally nation. This could be card 12 of an ally nation, and I think that's good enough. Very happy with this card. And then we have the Polish card. It is the Lublin RXIII, or the R13, or the RX3, which I think is just a much more satisfying way to say it. It is a 3-cost 2/3 fighter, 1 operation cost. The passive ability, your cards you play have Intel 1. I would imagine this counts itself. Like, I imagine this plays down with Intel 1. And deployment, reveal target covert unit. And this is really interesting. So this is sort of the covert, the anti-covert tech. This seems incredibly, not like bad, but it seems incredibly weak if it is supposed to be anti-covert. Like, imagine if covert synergy deck is tier 1, where, like, you know, they play like 15 covert cards, and they're consistently having like 3 or 4 covert cards on the board at any given time. Lublin, a 3 of in Poland ally, reveal a single covert card when you play it, is not good at all. That, like, this is not a good answer to covert. And the cards you play have Intel 1, not a great effect. Like, you know, there's just better things you can do. I can't see a world where this ever makes the cut. However, it's an interesting card to have in the game. And just an interesting note of something you can do with this card is deployment. It says deployment reveal covert unit. This can be a friendly unit or an enemy unit, and typically you will be playing this on an enemy unit. But there is a world where you could play this on a friendly unit if it's, like, still in the support line. Like, you don't want to push it to the front line and risk it being traded out immediately. So you keep it in the support line until it's ready to reveal, but then you can't reveal it immediately until you push it to the front line. So this could help you reveal a friendly covert card 1 turn faster. Maybe, like, if there's a after this is revealed, gain stats. I don't know if that would trigger before or after combat, like if you reveal it through combat, like as an attack in a unit. So maybe you can reveal the card first and then attack with it with its gained effect or whatever. So I could see, like, some niche situations where maybe you want to, like, reveal your own covert stuff, but, like, are you going to be playing Soviet Poland covert? Probably not. This is an interesting card. Like, it's better than the Mighty Shall Fall or whatever the Destroy a Veteran card was called. Like, if this is the equivalent for this expansion of just, like, anti-new mechanic card, it's more interesting than the other ones, but it's going to see about as much play. And then we get to the 2 new cards that were revealed today. Both of them are Soviets. The first one is Turmoil. It is a 2-credit Soviet order. Deal 2 damage to a unit. Deal 4 damage instead if it is damaged. This is actually an interesting card. This is a card that feasibly could see play. Because, 1, it's not limited to ground units. So that's always, like, sort of Hammer is often a card that a lot of people, myself included, I love bringing up Hammer. Hammer is an often spoke about card and a rarely run card, because Hammer only hits ground units, and often the biggest units and most annoying units and the biggest threats that you have to respond to immediately are air units. So the Soviets as a whole find it difficult to remove air units. Obviously, there's cards like Burning Skies and the 52k that deal 4 damage to an air unit, but then they don't deal damage to ground units, and maybe your opponent's not playing air units, maybe they're frontline. So having a card like Turmoil where it's cheap, it's not like an incredibly expensive card, it's not like Critical Hit or something, it's cheap, and it can target ground units or air units, and 2 credit deal 2 damage is not good, but if it kills the unit, you'll play it. Like, you know, if it's a 35T, if it's a Type 93 or whatever, like if it's a unit that you need to kill, and you are happy to play Turmoil to kill it. It's 2 credits to remove a 2 credit unit. Now if it has more than 2 health, that's where it gets tricky. Because if they play like a 3 health unit, you don't want to play Sickle Turmoil, because then you're just 2 for 1-ing yourself. Now if they have a 5 health unit, you are perfectly happy to do Sickle Turmoil. I suspect that this card is not good enough to play in any deck, but I think it's very close, and I think that you'll probably see this card on ladder a bunch. I think people will try it out. I think it's a card you need to play around, but I feel like it's just not easy enough to get damage on units for you to justify running this card. If Sickle didn't exist, maybe this would be the Soviet control, like, sort of early game. But also, if Sickle didn't exist, this gets much worse, because it's a lot harder to damage enemy units on demand. So yeah, Turmoil is just not there for me. Like, I don't know, I think like the best deck you could run it in would be self-damage, but then self-damage, this doesn't damage your HQ, and this doesn't synergize with damage in your HQ. I don't really know what deck this runs in. And this is sort of the weird part where I'm worried that Soviets... On the one hand, I don't want Soviets' identity to be covert units, because I don't want a covert synergy deck, because I'm very worried about the impact that will have on the meta. But if we go back and look at the Soviet cards, this is a covert card, this is a covert card. They only had 2 cards shown, whereas every other nation had 3. And then the 2 new cards, the Turmoil, this is just incredibly generic, standard, or it's not even standard, it's a limited. Super generic removal piece. Could be, I mean, like, it's Soviet themed. It's synergizes, or it's themed around the unit being damaged, but, like, this is just incredibly generic. This could have come out in any expansion. And it has no clear synergy with any specific deck. And then the last card that's revealed is Soviets. It's the 410th Rifle Regiment. It is a 6-cost, 3/3 infantry. Just so that stuff like, you know, Ural Factories and Red Banner, if they ever come back, get a lot worse. And it has destruction. Sorry, deployment gets +3/+3. Destruction, add 2 suppressed copies of this to your support line. So what this means is it's a 6-cost 6/6. Like, it plays as a 6-cost 6/6, and when your opponent destroys it, it adds 2 3/3s to your support line. That's sort of how to think about this card. I know it's a little weird, the wording, but that's how it works. It's a 6-cost 6/6, destruction adds 2 3/3s. And that's like a solid draft card. Like, you know, it's decent value, but it doesn't have guard, it doesn't have blitz, it doesn't heal, it doesn't draw cards. And also, I find it funny that it has suppress in the keyword, because if this card gets suppressed, you lose the game immediately, because suppressing this card is -3/-3, and removes the destruction effect of additional 3/3. So suppressing this card is losing 9/9 in stats. That's more than suppressing a Joseph Stalin. I'm not saying it's worse than suppressing a 272nd. I'm not saying it's worse than suppressing the 272nd, but, you know, this card is just hilariously bad. And again, this card could have come out in any expansion. This card has no synergy with any existing deck. It has no synergy with the cards revealed already. And it's just bad. Like, this, again, it's a limited. This easily could have been a standard, but, like, you know, this card is just bad. The one thing to say is maybe if Soviets ever get an AoE evolve effect, so like something like Ural Factory, something like Red Banner that affects all your units simultaneously. So like sort of Monastery, is that what the card's called? It's like the opposite effect on the enemy, like all enemy units get turned into random ones that cost 1 less from the same nation. Like, if there's ever a positive effect for that, maybe you could play this, because it adds 2 6-cost 3/3s, and then maybe you can turn them into 7-cost units for cheap. maybe that's like a future synergy thing. I don't think that we're getting that this expansion. Or else that would have been the thing shown off in the beginning. So at this point, we've seen 4 Soviet cards, 2 are Covert Synergy, and 2 are absolute garbage pack fillers. I'm a little worried. Because again, if you go back to my rotation video, Soviets got the least back, like they got the worst cards returning. They have the least impactful cards returning, and they actively did not return any Soviet elites or specials. They are currently the least played nation in the game. And they are having their only playable archetype losing the best card, and their only other playable archetype also losing the best card. Like, they're losing the best Soviet control card and the best tokens card. They got back absolutely nothing, and 4 cards in, there's only a glimpse at one possible archetype, and it's an archetype that I hope doesn't exist because it would be bad for the state of the game. So, yeah, that is the state of Soviets at the moment. Hopefully it gets better. But Soviets aside, I'm very excited for US. I think US is going to do some interesting things. I think US frontline is just always going to exist in some form or another. So this expansion doesn't need to push it a lot. Grumengoose looks incredibly interesting to play around with in a wide variety of decks. I'm very excited to test out Grumengoose and try to figure out a way to crack it. But otherwise, US ramp looks very exciting. Bomber Mafia, very cool card. I'm very excited to play with that card. Britain has Commandos. I mean, Commandos aren't super exciting, but they're fun. And hopefully that they're not too overwhelming, because, you know, nobody likes too much randomness in the game. But yeah, Britain has Commandos, and that could adequately replace sort of the hole left by Commonwealth Monsoon Supply. Then you have Germany, which is getting the countermeasure synergy cards. That one seems like it's probably going to fall flat, but we've seen enough Germany in Winter War to last a lifetime. You know, Germany has had, like, the best deck in the game, like, for the last, like, 5 decks. So, you know, Germany not getting a ton of cards this, like, a ton of good cards this expansion seems fine. The worry is Germany will always seem to get, like, one really good card. Like, if we look back at Brothers in Arms, Germany got a lot of duds, but then they also got Schützen, which ended up just being, like, the most played card of the expansion. So, like, yeah, you know, maybe Germany's gonna get a Panzergren 2.0, but we'll have to see. Subscribe if you haven't already to stay up to date with the new cards as they come out, and you can hear my thoughts on them, and hopefully I will get to reveal a card of my own, or a couple cards of my own, later down the line as we get further into the reveal season. But let me know what you think of these cards down below. Let me know if I missed something. Let me know if you agree with me, disagree with me. You have some spicy decks you're going to be cooking once the expansion drops with what's been revealed already, and I will catch you in the next one.